Both of these SUVs cost over $70,000, so we need to decide which one is the better buy, Land Cruiser or GX.
Showcase. The reason we're doing this comparison is because the new Toyota Land Cruiser and the new Lexus GX are sister cars underneath.
Yeah, and there's so many similarities between them. I think there's a lot of people out there that are trying to figure out which one to get.
And the crazy thing about this comparison is, as spec'd, this Toyota and that Lexus are $200 different in MSRP, just under $72,000 for both of them.
Yeah, really couldn't get much closer.
Case, what's under the hood of the Toyota?
We have a 2.4 liter four-cylinder, which doesn't sound like much for an SUV of this size, but it's mixed with a hybrid system, and our total system output here is 326 horsepower, 465 pound-feet of torque, so it definitely doesn't feel underpowered.
Yeah, both of these are big, heavy SUVs, but when you go foot to the floor of the Toyota, it really, really boogies.
I put my head into the headrest.
Because what happens is, from a stop, the electric motors give you an instant push of torque, and then the turbo has a chance to spool up, and then you get a big wave of torque. So there really isn't a lot of noticeable lag in this powertrain because that electric system does a great job of filling in the gaps where the turbo may not be spooled up.
And although this hybrid system is more about power than necessarily having a ton of efficiency, it is more efficient than the Lexus.
Yeah, now let's talk about that Lexus. So under the hood of the Lexus, you'll find a twin turbo V6 non-hybrid, right?
Yeah, 3.4 liter, and also really good power output on that vehicle. So we're looking at 349 horsepower and 479 pound-feet of torque. So just a little bit more than what you get in here, but still really substantial numbers.
Yeah, very, very impressive. But as you mentioned, fuel economy is way down on that Lexus. So even though curb weights are pretty similar, this vehicle is rated at 23 mpg combined. That vehicle is rated at 17 mpg combined. What's interesting about these two is when you see them individually out in traffic or in pictures, they don't look that similar. But when you park them next to each other, that's where you really can tell they are based on the same platform. There are a lot of carryover design elements. Let's talk about the windshield and the way you've got this two-tone look that separates the A-pillar from the roof. This sculpted curve along the side of the vehicle that starts behind the front wheel and makes its way toward the rear. It's pretty much the same across both of them. Same with this kick up here on the belt line and the way the quarter windows are sculpted, and especially the actual fender flares themselves and this squared off look is very similar between the two. And this is a really smart thing that Toyota and Lexus did, in that you see the Lexus and you see the Land Cruiser, and as an average person you'd have probably no idea they are related, but it's when you get them next to each other that's where you can really tell some of the design similarities. In case, between the two, which one do you think looks better?
I'm partial to the GX. This is my favorite style GX by far, and especially on these knobby open country tires that this particular one is spec'd with. But at the same time, this Land Cruiser I also think is pretty sharp.
I really do like the way Toyota has incorporated some retro design touches into the Land Cruiser. I love the Toyota scripting here across the front, this egg crate style grille, which looks a little bit retro. This is a very squared off, boxy design. I also like your little rigid fog lights down there, which you can actually change the colors on, which is pretty cool. So I'm a little bit more partial to the Land Cruiser design. You can also get this vehicle like in the 1958 trim with the round headlights, which I think is a very attractive look. But I'm with you, Case. This is by far the best looking GX ever, period, bar none, no question. So much better than first and second gen. A lot more rugged, especially if you get the Overtrail trim. But look, you're not going to go wrong with either version from a look standpoint. Now, the big difference in driving these two from an engine standpoint is that Lexus is a lot more refined and certainly quicker. This engine is not the quietest unit on the road. It certainly doesn't have the best growl, and it's just a little buzzy.
Yeah, but you do hear, especially with the windows down, a little bit of turbo noise, which I don't hate personally.
Yeah, that does make it a little bit more fun. It's not to the point where it's intrusive into the driving experience, but the V6 definitely is a slightly more pleasant engine to listen to.
My favorite thing about the way this Land Cruiser drives is how floaty it is. It's got a really nice soft ride that I would expect from a big, rugged, boxy 4x4, and that is probably my personal favorite thing about driving this vehicle. I think my least favorite thing here is, and this is true of a lot of modern Toyota vehicles, that there are a lot of electronic systems that are pretty regularly chiming you about driver attention, about a car that's going to be, you know, driving across in front of you. It's just a little intrusive.
And a lot of those Toyota safety systems are great. They do a really good job of keeping you and your family safe, but there are some that can be naggy. Luckily, there is some option to turn some of that stuff off, which is nice, but I would agree, Case, these Toyotas do a lot of beeps and bonging. Now, you are spot on with the ride quality. You wouldn't expect this vehicle to be as Cadillac-like as it is, and I think part of that is the curb weight, over 5,000 pounds. And then the spring rate just makes this vehicle super soft. There's not a ton of like rebound or dampening control, which honestly in the vehicle of this class is a good thing. This is not a car that I would really want to hustle around a mountain road.
No.
But where you guys drive in the real world, which is around malls and through parking lots and a Starbucks and on the highway, this is a good ride.
Yeah, and off-road as well. It's very, very compliant.
So Case, the Land Cruiser comes in 3 trims. There's a 1958 spec, which starts at after destination just over $57,000. There is the Land Cruiser. There you go, driver inattention, look forward.
Yeah.
I'm paying attention, I promise. The Land Cruiser trim, which is what we're driving right now, starts in the 60s, but with the premium package and a bunch of options, this vehicle comes in at just under $72,000. And then there is the first edition, 1,000 of those made. Those are going to be mid $70,000 range.
Yeah, supposedly these vehicles are starting at 55. I think you'll have a hard time actually finding one for that.
Right.
But I do wish that these vehicles, that this Land Cruiser in particular, had a slightly more aggressive tire on it, like what the GX has. I like that tread pattern. It's a little bit knobbier, and I think it would suit the character of this vehicle also really well, because this is kind of a rugged machine, especially in how blocky this interior is and the roof rack and everything, so we should just have more tire.
Great point. I mean, we talk about how this interior feels more off-road ready, right?
Yeah.
More squared off, more chunky. Yeah, I'm still paying attention. Thank you, car. But in this Land Cruiser trim, there isn't an option for a wheel tire package as aggressive as the Lexus.
Yeah.
And Lexus has a special trim on the GX called the Overtrail, which gives you the tires and the skid plates and the KDSS and the rear locker. Funny enough, every Land Cruiser comes standard with the rear locker. This Land Cruiser does have the disconnectable front stability bar, which is fantastic, but you can't get it from the factory with that super aggressive Lexus tire wheel combo.
Yeah, I wish they had a tire package like that.
Yeah, for sure. The interior of the Land Cruiser can be very different depending on the trim and configuration. So it can either go from pretty basic and utilitarian in the entry-level 1958 trim to a quite luxurious experience if you get this Land Cruiser version with the premium package. So let's talk about what this interior is comprised of. Let's start out with the seat design. So obviously we've got a premium material versus the more basic cloth seat on the standard 1958. We also have power adjustable seats on both the driver and the passenger side, although one bummer is the passenger does not have the option for lumbar control. We also have heated and ventilated seats in this version, so it's a very comfortable place to be. I find the GX seats to be a little bit more supportive than the Land Cruiser seats, but these are still pretty good for a long road trip. Now, if we look at the overall dash layout, this is definitely what I would describe as a more rugged design. So everything is very squared off, a little bit less swoopy in its overall profile, and technology is fairly similar in some areas and a little different in others. So let's talk about the screen. So standard Land Cruiser is an 8-inch screen. This is the upgraded 12.3-inch display, and it runs the latest and greatest in Toyota software. So if you're familiar with the Tacoma, all the way down to like a RAV4. This is going to be a pretty similar infotainment system. It works pretty well. It's gotten a lot better over the years. It does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and everything you'd expect there. Pretty decent colors and overall pretty easy to use. Then we have 2 air vents down here and a separate climate control panel, which is pretty different to what the Lexus design is. Dual zone automatic climate control with physical toggles for just about everything, which I really appreciate. Below that, we're going to find our button for the camera view system, full 360-degree view, so you can see all around the vehicle. It would look better if Case's door was closed. Qi wireless charger down here, and then this is where we're going to find all of our off-road gear. So we've got our drive mode selector, MTS, and then our crawl control, which you use to cycle this mode selection here. So the function of this little spin knob is going to change depending on what you have selected. Now we've got our 8-speed automatic transmission selector with manual settings here to the left. No paddle shifters, but you can toggle the gears up and down there on the left. And then here we've got our additional off-road controls. Both of these vehicles have a full-time 4-wheel drive with a proper center differential, high range, push down into low range, center locker, rear locker. That's going to be standard on the Land Cruiser, which is not standard on the GX. You got to get the Overtrail trims for that. We've got our stabilizer bar disconnect. Once again, this vehicle has a manually disconnectable stability bar versus that GX, which uses EKDSS front and rear, which is an electronically disconnectable system that it does all on its own. Then in the center here, we're going to find a cool box, quite a luxurious feature. So if you want to keep beverages and things nice and cool, and then a full digital instrument cluster with our tachometer on the left, speedometer on the right. Steering wheel feels pretty premium, kind of once again that vintage, space-aged inspired design. Space-aged is the wrong word. Maybe I should say industrial inspired design, very squared off, very boxy Toyota script there across the middle. And then of course, the latest and greatest in the Toyota safety system. So we've got adaptive cruise control, lane centering, blind spot monitoring, collision alerts, everything pre-baked into this vehicle, ready to help you tackle your day-to-day commute. So Case, what do you think of the Land Cruiser interior? You're pretty impressed?
Yeah, it is. It's sharp, especially for a 4x4. I think it's got the right style to it. It's a good-looking interior. I don't think there's any problems here.
So Case, driving the Lexus GX. Now, there are a bunch of similarities in the driving experience between the two. My favorite being the sheer level of visibility out of both of these vehicles. So I talked to the chief engineer for a while back at the press launch of this Lexus, and one of the things that he was most proud of is how they were able to lower the belt line and create this huge fishbowl effect where you've got a great view out of the Lexus.
Which is nice because that's something that's missing on a lot of modern vehicles that are really trying to puff up the hood and make the vehicle look as big and as tough as possible, which is great from the exterior, but when you're actually driving off-road, having good visibility so that you can see what you're driving over and not have to rely solely on cameras, it's really nice, and the visibility out of this is pretty decent.
Even driving on-road, right? This is the anti-Hummer.
Yeah.
You know, huge windshield, really tall side windows. But what's cool is it doesn't look goofy on the outside because of the way they were able to do some design tricks, like with the little kick up on the rear quarter of this vehicle. It doesn't look goofy, but you get all the benefits of huge windows from the inside.
Yeah, I do like the visibility a lot. And similar to the Land Cruiser, I love the way that this vehicle rides because it is a very plush ride. So that's one of the big similarities between them. And where we live in Colorado, we've got some pretty rough roads. The roads that we're driving on today are actually pretty nice and smooth, but you can just tell that this vehicle has a nice floaty characteristic to it, which again, in a big boxy, rugged 4x4, that's exactly what I want.
Both of these cars have independent front suspension.
Yep.
Both have a solid rear axle, coil sprung, right? It's amazing that they're able to get this level of ride quality with that solid rear axle. The body controls, especially on the GX, are so good. Part of that is down to something called EKDSS, which stands for electronic kinetic dynamic suspension system.
Which is a mouthful.
So basically what this is, Case, is a dynamically controlled set of stability bars front and back on this GX, which allow the vehicle to either tighten or loosen some of the sway that this vehicle can achieve, but more importantly, the articulation that this vehicle can achieve off-road.
Yeah, and I will say, at least for off-road conditions, I do like the ability to manually hit a switch and disconnect the sway bar. It's kind of nice to be able to make those decisions yourself when you're off-roading, but still this fundamentally has the things that I want in an off-road SUV that I can select manually, like a true low range and a center and rear locker.
Now, one thing that may sway you, Case, is that on the road, you have a dynamic system, right? So you can tighten up stability bars, sway bars when you're doing some cornering, so you get a little bit of a flatter cornering experience. And then the other advantage of the Lexus system over the Land Cruiser is off-road, you also have that ability on the rear. So the Land Cruiser, you can disconnect the front completely, which is cool, I agree, but the rear is fixed. Whereas this has the ability to automatically adjust the rear as well. It really is a hard system to explain to the layman without getting super technical, but it has a massive impact on this vehicle's off-road performance.
The interior of the Lexus definitely has a more luxury appearance and some really nice materials, as you would expect from a Lexus product. So these seats are really nice. I love the little bit of green that's here on this different fabric built into the seat. Also contrast stitching, really nice looking, and they feel great to sit in. Really nice Lexus steering wheel here. Again, very good materials. In front of me, I have a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster with a different layout than the Land Cruiser, but the same size. I've also got paddle shifters here on the GX, and this is a 10-speed transmission instead of the 8-speed that you get there in the Land Cruiser. And then here in the center of the vehicle, you've got a 14-inch screen. So it is bigger than what you get in the Land Cruiser, but that's partly because the climate is built into this screen. So that could be a pro or a con, depending on what you like. If you don't mind that, it is a good looking system, but some people prefer having actual hard buttons for their climate controls, which is fair. Aside from that, you've got the same software that you get in the other car. And then moving down, we have our mode select, our drive modes, MTS, crawl control, all of the off-road features in pretty much the same spot that you get it on the Land Cruiser. We have our shifter here in the center. Again, not quite as blocky and off-roady looking, but it adds to the luxury feel of this interior if you're into that. And then this is a full-time four-wheel drive system like you get in the Land Cruiser. We have our control for high range and low range here, just like in the Land Cruiser. We have our center locker and our rear locker. But again, no manual button that you can press to disconnect the front sway bar.
Now, Case, both these vehicles are spec'd at just under $72,000. Now, for the money, that Land Cruiser is slightly better equipped. So for example, it has a wireless charger. This vehicle does not have a wireless charger. Yeah. That one has a 14-speaker audio. This one has a 10-speaker audio, but it is possible to get the Lexus to a higher configuration.
Yeah, so you can get a 21-speaker system here in the Lexus, which is pretty nice. And not having a wireless charger at $70,000 to me is a little crazy. But we do both have this cool box, which is, again, like you said, a pretty nice feature to have.
Yeah.
It definitely makes this compartment a little small, but still pretty cool. So they're both nice interiors. I think it depends on what your personal preference as far as style is. This interior, I'd say, is a little bit more comfortable. That interior is a little bit more rugged and old school with its manual, actual physical buttons for the climate. So it kind of depends.
And if you want the ultimate in luxury in your Lexus, the Overtrail Plus is going to have stuff like that wireless charger and, like, of course, the large pano sunroof. This one's got the same sunroof that you're going to find in the Land Cruiser.
Yep.
And then that's the one that's going to have the premium audio system built in as well. So, you know, price-wise, these two are spec'd as close as you can get. In terms of feature content, though, you can still get more on top of this if you get the Lexus.
Yeah, and both of these also have heads-up displays, but if you wear polarized sunglasses, you're going to have a hard time noticing that it's even there.
All
0
right.
to 60.
0 to 60 in the Land Cruiser. We're going to do sport mode. It's a little brake torque. 3, 2, 1. Full throttle. Pretty decent launch.
Yeah, it's not bad.
There's 30, 40, 50. And 60.
Saying 9.12, so, you know, that's okay.
Now look, that's not a super scientific stretch, just on a flat, straight stretch of road. It's not gonna, you know, blow your doors off if you're used to a brand new Corvette, but compared to like the current 4Runner, oh my gosh.
Oh, it's a world of difference. Our Solo DLs also measure a little on the slow side of everything that we use to test them.
Well, they are
very
rollout.
consistent.
Yeah, no rollout, but they are GPS enabled. So figure with rollout, you're going to be just over 8 seconds, maybe 8.5 seconds. So it's plenty quick for what you need. It's got a pretty consistent torque band, not a lot of gaps in the torque. Yeah, it's pretty decent.
All right, 0 to 60 in the GX. High expectations.
Oh, dude.
40, 50, 60. Nice. Man, Boogie's pretty good.
Yeah, so that was 0 to 60 Sport S Plus mode.
I know.
In the Lexus, 7.52. So
Yeah.
we're looking at about a 1.5 difference between the two.
Which is funny because on paper it doesn't seem like a very substantial power difference, but that at least suggests that it's actually a decent bit quicker.
Also, kind of a cool little growl.
Yeah, it doesn't sound horrible. It sounds a little augmented, but it's still a better noise, I would say, overall than what you get in the Land Cruiser.
Stepping into the rear of the Land Cruiser, it is a proper 3-seater rear bench, although there is a fairly large hump here for middle occupants. It is worth noting though that as configured, we do have a third zone of climate control back here with temperature and fan speed, along with 2 USB-C ports. Let's see, we've got any recline, a little bit of recline, so a pretty decent rear seat, not a ton of space, but good visibility for rear seat passengers. I don't think this is a back seat you're going to get very car sick in. Now, let's check out the rear of the vehicle. So, a couple of ways to get into the trunk on both of these. You can push a button here, and that's going to allow you to pop open the rear glass if you've got groceries or whatever you want to just slap back there. And then, of course, you can open up the whole rear lift gate. Now, the liftover height on the Land Cruiser is a little higher than you might expect. So check this out. There's actually a pretty good sized lip between the bumper and the actual floor, and that is due to that high voltage hybrid battery. It also means that in the US, the Land Cruiser cannot be had with a third row seat, although you might notice there are still third row cup holders and the third row USB-C port, which Toyota says is really good for camping. Now, this does cut into rear seat space. So we're looking at about 37.5 cubic feet with the seats up. Rear seats in the Land Cruiser do fold and they also tumble, which is another hint of this vehicle's third row cousins in other nations. But of course, here in the US, 2 row only, small lip as well. So it's not a completely flat load space. Now, the advantage of this hybrid system is actually going to be found right over here. So we have an AC 120 volt power outlet, but unlike the GX, this is a super usable amount of power, over 2 kilowatts worth of power through that port, 2,400 watts. So you could run a lot of accessories, a lot of fridges, pretty much anything you need right through that one port.
Tommy, you've also got vents all the way here for your third row passengers that don't exist.
Yeah, check that out. Once again, good for camping. If you do want a third row though, you're going to have to buy the GX and not the Overtrail. Like a Premium would have a third row, but not the Overtrail.
Like Tommy mentioned, one of the big GX perks is that you can get it in 7-seat configuration. But again, this Overtrail is not going to give you that option. The other thing that surprises me a little bit about this, being that it's a Lexus, is that I would think I'd have my own controls back here, but in this vehicle I do not. So I've got vents. They're in the console rather than up by my head, but I don't have my own controls. I do have some charging back there. Overall though, very similar amount of space here in the rear. Not an issue. I'm a similar height to Tommy, and I feel like I have plenty of space. Now let's check out the trunk in this, because back here you're also going to find one of the notable differences between these two vehicles. One similarity, you can still open the trunk and get into it that way, but as we open up the power liftgate, you'll see that my liftover height is lower than it is in the Toyota. So because of the lack of a battery in this particular car, we've got a little bit of extra space. This is about 40.2 cubic feet of space, so a little under 3 cubic feet extra. Another perk here on the GX is that it can tow as much as 9,000 pounds versus only 6,000 pounds on the Land Cruiser. Plus, both of these vehicles have full-size spares, which is also good to have.
So, okay, so now it's time to fight it out. You got 72 grand. Do you buy the fully loaded Land Cruiser with all the premium goodies? Or do you get the Lexus GX 550 standard Overtrail, the non-plus? Between these two, which are priced about as closely as you can possibly get, like a $200 difference, which one are you taking home?
I think for me, it's gonna have to be the GX. I do love the Land Cruiser name, and I like driving the Land Cruiser a lot, but this GX is a little bit more comfortable to sit in, and I like the looks of it from the exterior. I like the fact that I've got a V6 in here and the way it sounds, the higher towing rating, and the fact that you can get these more aggressive tires from the factory. All of that, for me, rounds this out to a vehicle that I would personally rather drive.
Now, I think a lot of folks would agree with you. And the one sentiment I see online a bunch is the V6 versus four-cylinder debate, right? A lot of off-road folks are still concerned about having the hybrid system and the turbocharging and all of that baked into the Land Cruiser. And granted, some of that is an unknown quantity, although Toyota's been doing hybrid systems for
a while,
over 2 decades now, so you're probably going to be pretty decent on that. But you also get more power. You know, I'm going to take a little bit of a controversial opinion and choose the Land Cruiser. And hear me out. Driving experience-wise, because they're on the same platform, it really feels like a Lexus. Yeah. It is a nice car to drive. And then, on top of that, you get the 2,400 watt onboard power, which I think is awesome. I mean, that is a game changer for when you're out camping and out and about. Plus, you see a little bit of a benefit out in the pump, right? Slightly over 20 mpg.
MPG is nice.
Yeah, where this is going to be mid to high teens. Plus, on top of that, for price to price, you get more features on the Land Cruiser. So you get the 14-speaker audio system versus the 10-speaker in this. Now, if you did get the Overtrail Plus, that's when you're going to get that rear seat climate. That's when you get the 21 speakers, but that's going to be over 79, 80 grand.
It's not going to be cheap.
Yeah, right. Plus, on the Land Cruiser, you get a slightly better approach angle as well. So that's all good stuff. The one thing we don't know is resale value, right? And the one thing we do know is availability. You can go out and buy a Land Cruiser now, and a lot of dealers are selling them. Sticker, out the door, you're done. These cars, these GX 550 Overtrails, hard to get. Whichever direction you go in, I think you're going to really enjoy the experience. They're both expensive vehicles, and I think I know, Case, in the comments, most folks are going to side with you. Right?
Sure.
And I think there's some very, very, very valid reasons for that. And I think the market's saying that too, because GX 550, especially the Overtrails, we've got a buddy that just ordered one, and it's like a 6 to 8 month wait just to get one, where you could realistically get any number of Land Cruisers at a bunch of dealers, right?
Very likely.
People are really excited about this. Plus, you get the Lexus brand on top of the Toyota brand, which in the US does hold a premium. But let us know what you folks think in the comment section below. Who do you agree with? And as always, it's been Tommy.
And Case.
Head over to alltfl.com, where we got everything related to these two vehicles in one convenient location. We'll see you next time.